Hi, I'm John, and this is the Post Haste. This is a very special edition of Holy Balls Mazda, What Have You Done? Today, Mazda released the new photos and many of the specs for the Mazda CX-5. Probably their most important vehicle, their biggest volume seller. And I think, they got one major thing very right. They did a really good job with it. And then there's three really bad things, and probably even more, but we'll stick to three. So let's start with the bad. Number one, biggest misstep, thing where I think Mazda just completely defecated the bed on this one, is they got rid of all their buttons. They're a company that's known for keeping buttons in their car, and they went to putting everything into the touchscreen. It's a 15-inch touchscreen, or a 12-inch in the smaller, in the lesser model, but it's everything's in there now, either that or a capacitive touch buttons in the steering wheel. And I just think that's a massive misplay on Mazda's part. This is a segment and a buyer that wants to get in and immediately know how to drive the car and not take time to figure that stuff out. And especially when Honda, has all buttons in their car at this point, and Toyota even more so than this car, I think that's going to be a huge deal for a lot of people. But the number two thing that's also a massive misstep is they have, a motor and a transmission that I think they developed in, sometime around the Revolutionary War, and they've been using in every vehicle. And I think everyone hoped for an update. And not only did they stick with these older, outdated pieces of technology, but they got rid of the turbo engine, so the enthusiast option is even gone. So they just have the 2.5 liter four-cylinder, made it to a 6-speed, that could have been a ZF 8-speed or something. I know, these are very reliable engines, and that's great, and a very reliable transmission. You could probably, buy this in your 30s and drive it till you die, but, the mile per gallon you're going to get is low. It's not quick. It really loses a lot to the CR-V and the RAV4. So I think that's going to be, a huge issue. And in 2027, they are supposed to add a hybrid engine, but, I hope in 2026 it would be the Toyota hybrid engine that they've been using the CX-50, but it's not. They're developing their own, and I think there's pros and cons to that. I trust Mazda engineers, but I also think Mazda is a smaller company that doesn't have the same amount of manpower to put behind it, say a Toyota. So we'll see. I'll reserve judgment, but hopefully it's a good engine when they have the hybrid in there, and hopefully if that fixes that. And then the third thing that I think is a massive misstep is they lengthened this vehicle. And I think partly what made the CX-5 great is it was a little smaller than the CR-V or the RAV4. And now it's, 4.5 inches longer, and, maybe that matters for cargo room. I don't know how much 4.5 inches really matters to you or your spouse, but, I think they were better off keeping it small and nimble. But, like so many manufacturers now, and I think there's a massive issue within the automotive industry, these vehicles just keep getting larger. I partly bought a Civic because, the Civic's now the size of what an Accord used to be. And the Accord is now the size of a, small cruise ship. And I think Mazda has kept their cars fairly the same size, especially the Miata, but even their other cars. And I thought that was a great thing. So I don't like that they're now trending in this direction as well. So the good thing that I think they did, which I don't want to say this is this car is a total turd, because it's not, is the exterior styling. I think they did a really good job on. The one thing I don't like about the exterior styling is I feel like the piece that comes off the headlights that dips under the grille visually makes the car look taller. And I think on a crossover and SUV, you want to visually diminish that as much as you can. So I think that design-wise didn't quite work out. It looked better in early renderings than it does in the production model, but it's still not terrible. And the side profile looks great. I think they sort of made the back a little taller and a little more squared off, so it looks a little bit more like a hatchback that's been scaled up, which I personally like. And I do think the back end was pretty much a home run. I think even little touches like putting the Mazda lettering on there rather than the logo was a smart move and the way to go. So I think the exterior styling looks great, and I think that's where this car is a weird dichotomy, because Mazda on one hand got one portion of it very right, but then once you get under the hood, it's got some issues. And the buttons are the real deal breaker, because once the hybrid engine's out, that kind of fixes that. But those buttons, unless they backtrack on it like VW has, those buttons are just going to make every day you get in that car, it's going to be, you're going to have to, go four steps deep to turn on your air conditioning, which is going to drive you slowly insane. Or even if that's just not the case, it's just not as, it's more distracting to not have buttons. So the one other thing that I think Mazda definitely got right on this vehicle is they didn't go the route that they went with the Mazda 3, and this does have a multi-link rear end. They didn't go to a torsion beam, which is a huge deal. I do think that's going to make the handling characteristics better, the overall road feel better. I know they say they've kind of compensated for it in the 3, but it's just not the same. It's just a more simplistic and cost-cutting suspension. So I am glad to see that they did that. But Mazda is one of those companies that I feel like they don't make many missteps. So today's press release, I think, was a little disheartening just because, I want them to stick around as a company. I want them to keep making, MX-5s. So I really wanted them to get the CX-5 right. And I hope I'm wrong, but I do think when people compare this to the RAV4 and the CR-V and maybe even the Hyundai Tucson, I think, a lot of the things I mentioned are just going to be deal breakers. But we'll see. I hope you guys appreciated the information. I know this is kind of quick and a little more just my opinion, but please like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And thanks for listening. Bye. People have plenty of time to look at your Soul Red Crystal when you're going 0 to 60 in 9 seconds. You really shouldn't be bragging about 4.5 inches. Oh look, you made me finish my old fashioned. You know what else is old fashioned? Your transmission and your engine.